Time, effort, consideration, and actually following what already exists. That is how you do a successful live action. Why that point is so hard to hit home, I couldn't tell you. But How to Train Your Dragon definitely got it done. This, from what I know, being DreamWorks' very first live action film, by God, you did perfect. Unlike a certain company that can't seem to get it right no matter how many they do. For one, the most obvious thing out of all of it, that being the CGI. Done to perfection and in a way that hasn't been done before. Regardless of what dragon it is, whether it's Toothless, Red Death, the hideous Zippleback, any of them, it all flows together well. There's not a single point in this film where it's actually choppy, and is very consistent throughout. And while for the most part this is a new cast of actors playing a big role, I will say they did a pretty good job at that. There were a lot of instances where I felt the live action character radiated the animated character. Regardless of how you felt casting wise, that was the case. I'll get more into this when we get to the cons aspect. As for the acting, I thought it was pretty decent. Again, new cast of characters, people we haven't seen before, and some people we have seen before in other films. But if there is one thing for certain, they definitely did a carbon copy of how it played out in the animated series, and then some. Hitting on comedic points that weren't ever there but actually made it work in the live action, making some important parts hit as hard as they did in the animated movie. Again, I'll touch more on that later on. As for the scenes that matter the most, that being Hiccup and Toothless learning to fly for the very first time, and Hiccup and Toothless fighting against Red Death, I'm not shitting you when I tell you this, these were done to perfection. As a matter of fact, maybe even better than the animation. If you are still able to make me feel visceral chills, strictly from watching a scene that I've seen multiple times over again, you've done something right. The soundtrack, the music, the action, all of it, in every single instance of this film was perfect. Same thing can be applied with Toothless versus Red Death. As a matter of fact, this final fight, I would argue, is better than the one where they learned to fly for the very first time. And side note, the Red Death design was beautiful beyond belief. I knew she was gonna look perfect, but I didn't think she would look this perfect. Just the sheer size and magnitude, let alone terror that came from this dragon, was beyond anything I expected. And as a matter of fact, looked a hell of a lot better than the one we saw in the animated version. I am so unbelievably proud with DreamWorks and how they were able to treat this dragon. CGI at every single point she was on screen, perfect. The way she went about using her flame, also perfect. There was not a single choppy moment with the pacing or the CGI to detract from what was happening in this final fight, similar to what we got in the animated series. And that could be said about every single part in this film, which explains why it's in the high 90s on the audience review. Now, with all that being said, regardless of how perfect this film was, there are still some downsides to every film, and this one has some. One of the biggest issues for me was that of the acting. Now, when I say that, only in certain parts where it could have been different. Again, like I said earlier, it's a new cast, it's a different way of going about doing it, but I still feel you could have slowed down the lines and grounded them a little bit more to get the point across. And I felt at different times in the film that it didn't really get the point across the way it was meant to. As any actor knows, less is more. You need to ground yourself to make yourself believable. Some of these, especially Hiccup's character, didn't really get the point across sometimes. And I get it. It's very difficult to try to emulate what you see in the animated movie. I get that. But there is still some semblance of acting that you can do to justify the impact that you say with your line. And that could be said about a lot of these characters. And while it was a small fraction of the time, it was usually those big scenes, or at least some of the big scenes, that actually had that happen. And while on the acting topic, let's talk about the most controversial thing out of all of this that's been a thing since day one, that being the actors. That mainly being Ruffnut and Astrid. In my personal opinion, I didn't see anything wrong with the Astrid character. Acting-wise, I thought it was okay. Looks-wise, I honestly didn't care. But to some people, they still didn't like it. I mean, at the end of the day, the movie was still very good, and this is just a small fraction of things that some people don't like. This is honestly the least of your worries. Same thing could be said about Ruffnut and Fishlegs. But a lot of people, as of recently, are hating the idea that they casted who they did for Ruffnut, looking absolutely nothing like the character whatsoever. And while to an extent that is the case, she still did pretty good in the grand scheme of things. I mean, if they make the movie good, then what's really the issue? I can understand where people are coming from, but it doesn't detract from what the story tried to tell. Another thing I noticed was that some of the scenes from the original animated film were actually taken out, but there was a good reason for it. The director actually stated that the reason they did this is because the things that were in the actual movie got the point across, and having anything else in there trying to justify that point that was already said would just have the movie drag. And while I'm inclined to believe that, there's one instance where Hiccup is looking through the dragon book or whatever, and they kind of rushed through that for no reason. And the scene before that with Astrid getting in Hiccup's face saying, "Oh, that house over there, yeah, that'll be mine one day when I'm chief," that never happened. With that in mind, I didn't like how they treated Astrid in terms of her basically hating Hiccup to liking him all of a sudden. To me, the moments that mattered that didn't involve dialogue, just strictly them interacting with one another with just facial expressions and whatnot, that point didn't get across very well. And if it did, I didn't notice it. It felt a bit rushed at times, but there's also times where it wasn't. It also leads off being able to deliver the lines in a way that makes sense and actually has impact in the grand scheme of everything. But overall, my cons are very minuscule. The pros of this film outweigh that entirely. Overall, I would rate this 4 out of 5 stars. I genuinely think this is going to be the best live action film we've gotten next to maybe Sonic. Well, if you have not seen this film, I highly recommend it, especially in IMAX, because that's what I went to go see it in, and it is perfect. So if you get a chance this weekend, definitely go watch it, because it is worth it.